Snow fell silently over Zurich, covering the immaculate streets with a white carpet that reflected the warm yellow glow of the streetlights. The city looked like a living painting, elegant, rigid, almost unreachable, exactly like the life of Isabel von Bergen, the young heiress of one of the most traditional and wealthy families in all of Switzerland. Raised from birth among galas, charity balls, international trips, and dinners where her glass was never empty, Isabel had always learned that wealth was synonymous with power, and that power meant being above everyone else. Isabel was 24 years old and known by many as the Princess of Zurich. Tall, slender, with crystalline blue eyes and blonde hair that resembled strands of gold, she was considered far too perfect for the reality of any ordinary person. But behind that almost untouchable beauty was a sharp arrogance, fueled by years of empty compliments, inherited privileges, and a circle of friends just as wealthy as they were bored. Among them was Nina, Isabel's best friend, or at least the one who best shared the same inflated ego. And there was also Lucas, the rebellious heir of a family of bankers. And it was precisely within that superficial group, where loud laughter was nothing but a mask, and empathy was seen as weakness, that the bet was born, one that would completely change Isabel's fate. That night, they were gathered in Nina's modern penthouse, which had a direct view of Lake Zurich. French champagne passed from hand to hand, and boredom was beginning to dominate the conversation, as always happened when the group spent too much time together. "Isabel, do you really think no man would be with you if it weren't for your money?" Lucas teased, with that smile that hid more poison than charm. She laughed, mocking. "My dear, I don't think. I know. Everyone wants something from me. Money, status, or my family name. Simple men don't even look me in the eye without trembling. Isabel, I bet you wouldn't have the courage to marry someone completely outside your standard. A simple man, poor, someone who doesn't match you at all. Half of my new jewelry collection, and I'll pay your entire trip to Dubai if you really marry, someone completely random. No beauty, no money, no status. It has to be someone improbable. You want to see me married to a stranger? Fine, I accept. And I'll prove that any man would agree to marry me, even if I offered nothing but my presence." He wasn't just overweight, he was very overweight. He had round cheeks, broad arms, a protruding belly, and a sweet smile that lit up his gentle face. Emile was the kind of person who got emotional over small kindnesses and never let anyone leave his restaurant without a "have a good day." He was too kind to notice when people laughed at him behind his back. He lived in a small rented apartment, dreamed of one day opening his own restaurant, and took care of his sick mother by himself. His life was peaceful, simple, honest, completely distant from Isabel's cold and luxurious reality. He would never imagine that someone like her would even notice his existence, much less marry him. But the bet existed, and Isabel didn't usually lose. "Let's choose someone completely improbable," Lucas said, still laughing. "Someone who is the opposite of your type. Someone like that guy out there," Nina asked. "I never lose a bet." No one like her had ever spoken to him that way, with a warm smile, a touch on the arm, interest in her eyes. To him it felt like a dream, an impossible dream, but there was something he didn't know. Isabel wasn't in love. She was fulfilling a bet. "You seem like someone different," she said during their first meeting. "Someone real." With each date, Emile showed himself to be more kind, more sincere, more affectionate. Isabel ignored these qualities and stuck to the plan. It was just a game. She repeated that daily, like a mantra, until, in less than 2 months, Emile, completely enchanted, knelt down and asked Isabel to marry him. She accepted, and laughed at the situation as soon as she was alone. The wedding took place in a small civil registry office, with no guests, just photos as the bet required. Emile was so nervous his hands were trembling. Isabel looked bored but kept smiling for the pictures. And then, the mandatory 3 months began. Isabel's friends laughed behind her back. Nina said, "It must be hard living with someone like that." Lucas added, "She'll survive, the bet is worth it." He noticed that Isabel never introduced him to her friends. He noticed that she seemed uncomfortable being seen with him, and that hurt him. But he kept trying. He cooked for her, helped however he could, tried to make Isabel smile, without imagining she had never loved him, without imagining he was part of a cruel bet, without imagining that his greatest humiliation was about to happen, because the truth always finds a way to surface. And when it did, Isabel wasn't prepared for what she would face, and even less for what she would lose. The snow was already beginning to melt in downtown Zurich, but inside the small apartment where Emil and Isabel shared their new and completely unbalanced life, winter felt even harsher. The clock marked only 2 weeks since the marriage had been made official, but for Isabel, those days dragged on as if they were months. She felt trapped in a role she had never wanted, the wife of someone she did not consider on her level. He made coffee, set the table, left kind notes, sometimes flowers, sometimes a Swiss dessert he himself had prepared with hands shaped by years in a professional kitchen. He truly believed he was building something, that he had found someone who saw him beyond his body, beyond his social class, beyond his insecurities. But Isabel saw none of that. To her, everything was a countdown. 12 weeks, 90 days, and it would all be over. In her mind, every gesture from Emil was part of a role she had to endure, and the kinder he was, the more irritated she became. She had never lived so closely with someone so human, so real, so imperfect, so different from the cold and calculated world she was used to, and it bothered her deeply. In the 3rd week of marriage, the tension began to take shape. The first crisis happened over something small, but revealing. Emil asked her to accompany him to the restaurant where he worked, so that his colleagues could meet her. He spoke about it proudly, as if he were taking a princess to visit his village. His eyes sparkled like a child showing off his favorite toy. "They're going to love you, Isabel. I've talked so much about you to them," he said, smiling as he put on his coat. Isabel froze. "You talked about me?" she asked, with clear discomfort in her tone. "Yes. I told them how elegant you are, how happy you make me. They were curious to meet the amazing woman who married me. I don't feel comfortable in that environment. We want updates, Elol." "So, what's it like living with?" She made an exaggerated face. "With Emil. He tries to please me all the time. It's almost annoying." "I hope you're okay. I made your favorite dish. If you want, I'll save it for you." He wanted to show he could belong in her life. When she arrived, exhausted and irritated with her own unstable mood, she found the table set, candles lit, soft music, and Emil smiling, wearing a shirt that barely fit, but that he insisted on putting on to look more formal. "I just wanted you to feel good here. For our home to be... I just wanted to see you happy," he murmured. "Then stop trying, Emil, because you don't understand my world." Why did it affect her? She didn't know, or didn't want to admit. Emil, on the other hand, began working more hours to avoid being home. He smiled less. He avoided conversation, afraid of upsetting her again. But despite everything, he kept trying to be kind. He kept leaving notes, kept asking if she needed anything, kept believing it was his fault, that he simply wasn't good enough, but the worst was still to come. The truth began to approach when Emil stumbled upon a conversation between Isabel and Nina, not because he was snooping, but because her phone vibrated and lit up while he was setting the table. The message read, "Only a few weeks left to end this torture. Friend lololol. After that we disappear from him." Isabel was hiding something dirty, something cruel. He took a deep breath, felt his chest burn, but decided to wait. He needed to hear it from her lips. He needed to know the truth, even if it hurt. The final humiliation began to unfold in the 9th week. Nina planned another party and insisted that Isabel come. And this time, Emil came along. Isabel didn't want to bring him, but couldn't refuse when he insisted, sweetly and innocently. "I want to meet your friends. I want to be part of your life." Every second there beside him seemed to expose everything she hid, her prejudice, her arrogance, her shame. And then, it happened. Lucas, already drunk, lifted his glass and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "A toast to Isabel, who's almost winning the bet. Just a few more weeks until she's free of this unlikely marriage." Heart breaking into pieces so small they seemed impossible to rebuild. "Bet?" he said, his voice completely shattered. "What bet?" he asked, tears forming. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Emil felt the world crumble beneath his feet. He left the party without looking back, with tears falling, with his heart shattered, and with his soul crushed by the cruelest truth he had ever faced. He was never loved. He was only a bet, and Isabel realized it too late, because the man she destroyed was the very man who could have transformed her. The icy wind slashed through the streets of Zurich like invisible blades that dawn. The lights reflected on the ground, wet from the melting snow, and the silence of the city seemed to swallow everything that had happened hours earlier. Emile walked without knowing where to go, breathing short and uneven, while his chest burned as if it were on fire. He had never felt anything so devastating. The image of Isabel beside her friends, silent, allowing them to laugh at him, allowing them to call him a martyr, to expose the marriage as a cheap bet. Nothing, absolutely nothing had prepared Emile for that. He arrived at the apartment, went in without turning on the lights, let himself sink into the couch and cried. Cried with the strength of years of insecurities, rejections, unspoken words, crushed dreams. He cried because, deep down, he had always been afraid of being exactly what they said he was, a man no one would ever choose. For the first time, Emile saw himself broken. Meanwhile, at the party, Isabel was still motionless, heart racing and breathing uneven, watching the laughter echo like ghosts. But she did not laugh. She couldn't. Something inside her had burst, something she didn't know existed. Shame, true shame. For the first time in her life, Isabel felt the pain she caused, and that pain cut through her like a sharp sword. Nina came closer with a crooked smile. "Relax, girl. He'll get over it. It was just a bet. He's an adult. He'll deal with it." She pushed everyone away, shoved Lucas hard and left the party, as if fleeing from a nightmare she herself had created. From that point on, Isabel's fall began. When she arrived at the apartment, she found the lights off and the heaviest silence she had ever felt. She called for Emile a few times, but he didn't answer. The table still had remains of the dinner he had prepared the night before, and that made her shiver. Was this what she was destroying? She walked slowly through the living room, touching the simple objects, the modest decor, the home Emile had tried to build with love, while she contributed only with coldness. She sat on the couch where he had cried minutes earlier, without her knowing. She ran her hand over the fabric and felt the weight of guilt fall upon her shoulders. "What have I done?" she whispered to herself. That night, Isabel cried for the first time in a long time. And she didn't cry for losing the bet, nor for being exposed. She cried because she had hurt someone who absolutely did not deserve any of it. The next day, Emile did not come home. She should have treated that as relief. After all, that was what she claimed to want. But for the first time, Isabel missed him. She missed the smell of freshly brewed coffee, the sound of pots and pans, the timid good morning, the gentle touches, the sincere smiles, the way he made the world feel less superficial. She spent the day walking around the house like a ghost, feeling the emptiness pounding in her chest. Every gesture of his had left a mark, and then she finally realized Emile had never been the problem. She was. The next morning, Isabel decided to look for him. She went to the restaurant. She went to the market he frequented. She went to his mother's house. No one knew where he was. It was only in the late afternoon that a colleague of his said, "Emile asked for some time off, said he might need to be away for a few days." He seemed devastated. Meanwhile, far from there, Emile had decided to do something he had never dared: travel alone. He took a train to a small town near the Alps, a quiet, silent, distant place where he could breathe without feeling the weight of humiliation. But he was not well. He spent the first days barely eating, barely sleeping, with a swollen face and a tight heart. He sat on wooden benches, watching the white mountains stretch into the horizon. He felt small, invisible, broken. And amid that silence, Emile realized something even more painful. He wasn't crying only because of the bet. He was crying because he truly loved Isabel, for real, with a silent, pure, honest intensity. He loved her for the fragility she hid, for the lost look when she thought no one was watching, for the small gestures she let slip without noticing. He loved her, and that made everything worse. While Emile tried to pull himself together in the mountains, Isabel was facing the biggest crisis of her life. Not financial, not social, emotional. She lost her appetite, lost her sleep, lost the superficial glow she always displayed. Everything seemed colorless. Because for the first time she began to see what truly mattered. Isabel had not only destroyed Emile's heart, she had destroyed herself. And it was that same week, while searching for answers, that she found something hidden in the apartment, something that changed everything. In Emile's drawer, next to some work papers, she found an envelope handwritten, "For my future wife." She began to read, and each line was a stab. Isabel, I never thought someone like you would look at someone like me. Far too good for her, and she had destroyed him. Driven by a new desperation, Isabel began to change. Not for him, but because she had finally seen the monster she had become. She cut ties with Nina and Lucas, spoke truths she had never dared to say, walked out of a dinner in tears while everyone else laughed about the situation. Isabel started therapy. She began visiting charitable organizations. She started looking at herself without masks. And above all, she began to feel longing for the man she had never deserved. When 2 weeks had passed without seeing Emil, Isabel made a decision. She would look for him, wherever he was. She traveled through nearby towns, asking at inns, restaurants, markets, showing photos, desperate, until an elderly woman said, "The big fellow always looked sad. He's staying at the inn by the mountain." She went up the narrow road, breathless, with snow clinging to her coat, and when she reached the inn, her hands were trembling. "Is Emil Baumann here?" she asked the receptionist. He nodded in confirmation, and then fate held its breath. Emil came out of his room with a suitcase in hand, ready to return to Zurich. He was thinner, his face more worn, his eyes sadder, and when he saw Isabel, his whole body froze. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. They just stood there face to face like two broken souls, until Isabel stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Emil, I'm sorry. Isabel, you destroyed something in me." She nodded, crying. "I'll give it to you as much as you need." When Emil returned to Zurich, some things had already changed inside him. He was still hurt, still felt the shame burning like an invisible scar on his chest, but there was also something new emerging. A thread of strength, a breath of dignity, a kind of quiet courage that only appears after someone hits emotional rock bottom for the first time. Emil was no longer the same man who had left in tears, and Isabel was definitely not the same woman who had hurt him. They were different, disconnected and at the same time closer than ever. When Emil walked through the apartment door, he found everything impeccably organized, but there was something that instantly caught his attention. The dining table was covered with papers, books, and scattered notes. Isabel was sitting there alone, writing something in a thick notebook. When she heard the sound of the door, she stood up so fast she dropped her pencil. She didn't run to him, as she might have done weeks earlier when she still needed to control the image she projected. She simply stayed there, with trembling hands, with a tired face, with eyes full of feelings she herself didn't understand. "Emil," she said in a low voice, "I didn't know when you'd be back. I just kept the apartment clean and did some things. I was empty, Emil. I was just shells, masks. Nothing inside me was real. I'm trying to be someone better. For me, not for a bet, not for others, for myself." She hesitated. "And because you deserve to be proud of the person who hurt you, even if you never want to see me again." In the following days, they began to live together like two strangers who shared memories far too intense to simply ignore. Emil slept on the couch, Isabel in the bedroom. They spoke little, but every word was more human and real than any luxurious conversation Isabel had ever had in her life. Little by little, she began to change small habits. She helped with cleaning. She asked about his work. She gave up superficial dinners. She even started going to the supermarket, something she would never have done before. And Emil watched it all with caution, without fully trusting, but without failing to notice. The turning point of their healing happened one afternoon, when Emil was cooking and Isabel slowly approached, holding something in her hands. "Emil, can I sit?" she asked quietly. He nodded. She placed a notebook in front of him. It was the same one she had been using at the table. "What is this?" he asked. "My reconstruction journal. My name is Isabel von Bergen, and today I discovered that I am not the person I always thought I was." Isabel began helping Emil with his mother, something that left him completely speechless. She went with him to the hospital, carried bags, talked to the nurse who took care of the older woman, and for the first time, Emil saw something in Isabel he had never seen before. Kindness, real, not performed, not superficial, and that confused him, because part of him still hurt, but another part was beginning to soften. As the weeks went by, Emil returned to work, and there another key moment of healing took place. When his co-workers saw him after the trip, they all came to hug him, ask if he was okay, offer support. Emil had always been well-liked, very different from what he believed about himself. And to everyone's absolute surprise, Isabel showed up at the restaurant alone. She asked for a table, sat down, waited patiently, and when Emil approached, she said, "Can I try your special dish today? Want to eat here?" Over the course of the weeks, something began to appear in both of them. Growth, humility, healing, respect. And that process, that journey, seemed to transform not only their relationship, but also the people around them. Emil started losing weight, not out of shame, but for his health. He began going for morning walks. He began smiling more. He began believing he deserved to be loved. Isabel started working on social projects. She began dressing less extravagantly. She began talking to real people. She began understanding that humility is a strength, not a weakness. And so, together and apart at the same time, they were growing. One day, while they were walking together to his mother's house, Isabel suddenly stopped. "Emil, can I ask you a question? And if you've followed this journey up to here, subscribe to the channel to keep receiving stories that touch, transform, and show that there is always a way to start over. Because stories like this remind us that we all deserve a second chance, even from ourselves." And then the months went by. Their relationship became lighter, more honest, more beautiful. They still weren't a couple. They still weren't lovers, but they were something better. Two people who chose to grow, who chose to heal together, who chose to rebuild without rushing. The marriage built on a lie was turning into something unexpected, truth. But fate still had one last twist reserved, a revelation capable of changing everything. And it is this revelation that will shape their future. A few months had passed since that reunion in the mountains, and since the beginning of the silent reconstruction between Emil and Isabel. Things weren't perfect, but they were real. Emil kept working at the restaurant, now with more confidence, new menu ideas, and a stronger presence in the kitchen. He had lost some weight, not to fit into other people's standards, but to fit better inside himself. He walked at dawn, breathed Zurich's cold air with a different spirit, and for the first time when he looked in the mirror, he didn't just see the fat man no one would choose, but someone who was fighting for himself. Isabel, in turn, had changed in such a way that her former friends barely recognized her. She had cut ties with Nina and Lucas, refused invitations to empty parties, traded dinners in luxurious halls for quiet coffees with real people. She had started volunteering at a shelter and using her family's money for social projects, something even her own parents found strange at first. But despite all this change, the past still existed. The bet still existed. The wound still existed. Even without speaking directly about it, they both knew there was a kind of invisible line between them. They cooked together, laughed sometimes, listened to each other, but didn't confess their feelings, didn't move forward. It was as if love were there, sitting between them, waiting for the right moment. That moment, however, came in a way no one expected. On a cold Monday morning, while Emil was chopping vegetables in the restaurant kitchen, the manager's phone rang and silence fell among the staff. When the call ended, everyone looked at Emil. "What happened?" he asked, puzzled. The manager took a deep breath. "Emil, Mr. Keller died." An older man, discreet, who rarely appeared but who had always treated Emil with respect, more than anyone else of that social level. Many times he'd called Emil into his office for quick talks, asked about his mother, listened to his dreams of having his own restaurant. Emil felt something sink in his chest. "When?" he managed to ask. "Last night. A heart attack," the manager replied. "And there's more. His lawyer called asking you to come to the reading of the will. There are cross-investments, business shares. It's important that you be present." The reading room was large, with tall windows, heavy curtains, and a central table where the lawyer had placed a thick, sealed envelope. The wealthy families began to arrive. Men in dark suits, women in expensive coats, perfumes filling the air. Isabel arrived accompanied by her parents. Her father, Mr. von Bergen, was a proud man, used to shaking important hands. Her mother, elegant and cold as ice, seemed more concerned with appearances than with any human life. Among the guests were also Nina and Lucas, the former friends. "I thought you'd already gotten rid of that burden." When his eyes met Isabel's, it was as if the entire room disappeared. She felt her heart race. He felt everything he had lived until then pass before him, like a movie. Nina whispered quietly, "Look, the main character of the bet." He placed the envelope on the table, took a deep breath and began, "Good afternoon, everyone. We're here to proceed with the reading of Mr. Heinrich Keller's will, recently deceased. As some of you know, Mr. Keller had a very particular view about business and about people. He asked me to read everything at this moment, exactly as it is written, without cuts. At first, everything sounded formal, words of thanks to the family, mentions of donations, technical details. Some sighed in boredom, until the important part came. As for my business assets, including the Keller House restaurant chain, related properties and stakes in other companies," the lawyer continued, "I, Heinrich Keller, declare that throughout my life, I met many wealthy men, but few truly good men. That is why I decided that my main inheritance will not follow the traditional path of blood, but the path of honor. A man who cried over his own mother's suffering, yet still made time to make someone's day better with a simple dish and a sincere smile. A man who, even when ridiculed by shallow people, did not return hate. He returned silence and dignity. He's just an employee." Others fell silent in shame, but it still wasn't over. The lawyer took a deep breath and turned the page. "Finally, before I died, I became aware of something that revolted me. A cruel bet involving Emil's marriage to a rich heiress made for fun, at the expense of a good man's heart. How they played with the marriage as if it were a social toy. I will not say here the names of those who took part in this primitive cruelty, because life itself will handle exposing whatever is necessary. But I will say only one thing. Those who humiliated him will be humiliated by their own conscience. And when that happens, I hope they have the courage to become better people." Everyone knew, everyone remembered, everyone connected the dots. The looks began to turn toward Isabel. She felt it. She felt the weight of every pair of eyes, every whisper, every judgment. She didn't need the will to say her name. That whole room knew the story. Many had heard the rumors. Some had been at the party where the truth was revealed. And now, what used to be backstage gossip had become almost official. The rich girl who married the fat man for a bet was right there, sitting, shrunk, red with shame, humiliated before the same people who had always applauded her. The murmurs began, relentless. Was it her? They say it was Isabel. Isabel von Bergen, the one who married him, and then... And if the part about the bet bothers you, perhaps the problem is not legal but moral. I would like to say something. His voice echoed in the room. The lawyer nodded. Emil took a deep breath. I didn't know any of this, he began. Not about the will. Not that I would inherit anything. I'm still processing it. I grew up believing I was no one. And suddenly they say I'm the owner of a restaurant chain. His eyes quickly passed over Nina and Lucas and finally over Isabel. But I've learned, in the hardest way, that what defines someone is not what people say about them. It's what they decide to be after everything. He took a deep breath and, in a decision no one expected, concluded, I accept what Mr. Keller left. Not for the money, not for the power, but because I want to honor what he saw in me. Someone who can do good. He looked around. And as for the rest, as for the bet, I've already begun to forgive. Not because it's easy, but because I want to be free. Those words, coming from someone who had every reason to return hate, cut through the air like an uncomfortable light. Some lowered their heads, others looked away, and Isabel felt something definitive break inside her, because in that exact moment, the man she had used for a bet, the man she had made cry, the man she had put in the lowest place, was standing, tall, dignified, while she sank in shame, sitting, unable to lift her eyes. Life had turned the game. The truth had come to light. And now, before everyone, the title of the story was fulfilled. The rich girl who married a fat man for a bet was being humiliated when the truth came to light. But the difference is that his humiliation destroyed him for a time. Hers was about to transform her for good, because the harshest judgment was not from others. It was her own in front of the mirror, and she knew, from now on, either she would stay small forever, or she would finally become someone great, but great in the right way. The reading of the will was like a silent earthquake that shook all of Zurich, not just the circle of millionaires who were used to deciding who was worthy of respect. Social media exploded with rumors. Gossip sites began to speculate. People who had never heard of Emil Baumann were now talking about him as the cook who became the owner of an empire. Heiress Isabel von Bergen involved in cruel marriage bet. Sources confirm millionaire Bet may have used Cook as entertainment. The humiliation has turned. Who is really the Princess of Zurich? Isabel, what have you done? Her mother raged. You destroyed our reputation. You're going to appear publicly, deny everything, say it's slander, that it's distorted. Or maybe for the first time she was becoming sane. Meanwhile, Emil's life took a leap he never imagined possible. He had spent years chopping vegetables, cooking pasta and washing dishes, always in the same simple and honest routine. And now, in a matter of hours, he was the owner of the Keller House chain. 8 restaurants, properties, stakes in food brands, and a fortune most people would never see up close. But Emil was not smiling. He was not celebrating. He was afraid. "Why me, Jesus?" he murmured, looking at the ceiling of his small room. "I never asked for this, never wanted this. Why?" She was everywhere. In the newspapers, in the gossip, in his memories, in the back of his heart. And in one corner of him, there was still pain. But there was also something else. Hope. The days that followed were chaos for Isabel. She went to the market and people whispered, walked through the city center and fingers pointed, entered cafes and stares pierced through her. Before, she had been admired for her beauty, wealth, and status. Now, she was seen as an example of cruelty. Some whispered, "That's her, the one from the bet." Others said, "I never liked that family anyway." Some were harsher. "Serves her right." She couldn't take it. She threw the magazine on the ground, got in the car and cried. Not the arrogant crying of someone who refuses to lose, but the real crying of someone who looks at themselves and doesn't recognize who they are. And so, in silent tears, Isabel realized her public humiliation was fair. Emil's public humiliation never was. That difference hurt more than any headline. The next night, Isabel did something she never imagined she would. She went to the Keller House restaurant. The place was busy. Customers dining, waiters coming and going, the delicious smell of garlic and butter drifting out of the kitchen. She walked in slowly, almost hunched, and all the conversations quieted. Eyes fell on her, some cold, others curious, some even hostile. But Isabel did not back down. She took a deep breath and walked in. The manager, who knew the story, raised his eyebrows, surprised. "Isabel? What?" His body froze for a moment. The whole restaurant seemed to hold its breath. He turned slowly. When their eyes met, there was still pain. There was still distance. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low, calm, but heavy. She swallowed hard. "I came to ask for forgiveness. Not the forgiveness you gave me out of kindness, but the forgiveness I need to ask looking into your eyes. There's a lot going on." But she took a deep breath. "Thank you for being honest. Thank you for telling me the truth I deserve, but real." Isabel kept facing public judgment, but now with dignity. She didn't deny the story, didn't invent versions to protect herself, gave interviews talking about true repentance, owned her mistakes, worked quietly to help other people, anonymously. And society began to change its view, not completely, but a little. Emil faced his new position with humility. He restructured the restaurant, raised salaries, implemented support programs for employees who were obese, had low self-esteem, or were in vulnerable situations, something he himself would have loved to have in the past. And slowly, without realizing it, their lives began to align again, not like before, not as husband and wife forced together by a bet, but as two people who had grown, two survivors of a cruel and incredibly human story. And, deep in both hearts, there was still room for what would come next. Something that fate was only beginning to draw. The days following the meeting at the restaurant were strangely quiet, but a silence different from that of months before. It was no longer a cold emptiness. It was a pause full of possibility, as if the universe, for the first time, were giving Emil and Isabel some time to breathe before they took the next step. They did not start seeing each other every day. They did not go back to living as a couple. They didn't promise anything, but they began to do something they had never truly done: talk. The first meeting after that night at the restaurant was simple. Isabel sent a short message. "Hi, Emil. I know you're busy, but if one day you'd like to have a coffee in some neutral place, I would really like to talk without pots and pans, without headlines, and without the past screaming in the background. Just you and me. For real this time. The pastry shop was charming, with few tables, display cases full of handmade sweets, and a cozy smell of coffee with cinnamon. Isabel arrived a few minutes early and absent-mindedly played with the edge of her cup. Her hands were shaking. She had faced interviews, lawyers, angry parents, journalists hungry for scandal, and yet nothing made her as nervous as waiting for Emile. When he walked in, the world seemed to slow down for a few seconds. He looked different, a little thinner, more confident, but still with that gentle look she had learned to recognize. He saw her, stopped, took a deep breath, and walked over to the table. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi," she replied with a shy smile. He sat down. For a few seconds, neither of them knew where to start. It was he who broke the ice. "You seem different," he said honestly. She laughed softly. "I am different. At least I'm trying to be." "That's a good start. Or when you prepared that dinner I criticized, or when you apologized for things that weren't your fault. What I know is that there was a moment when the bet still existed, but my heart had already changed, and that terrifies me to this day. I could have protected you from the humiliation. I could have been brave, but I wasn't. I was a coward, and that is what hurts about me. But to love again," he paused, "it is another story, and you truly saw me. Without masks, without bets, without an audience, and for the first time smiled sweetly. That's fair. About her social projects, about the pressure of headlines, about the absurdity of him now being one of the most influential men in the food industry. It was a medium-sized space in a less luxurious neighborhood, but full of movement, with families, workers, young people. On the walls there were architectural sketches, logo drafts, menu ideas. Emile showed everything with a sparkle in his eyes. "Here will be the open kitchen," he said, pointing. "I want people to see who's cooking. I want the cooks to be treated like artists, not like shadows. I thought of something, tied to a new beginning, but I don't know yet. I'm terrible with creative names. Recomeço, restart." She, however, felt something ignite in her chest. It was no longer just regret. It was no longer just guilt. It was affection, admiration, a more mature love that had nothing to do with luxury, status, or bets. It was a love born from truth. Sometime later, with the construction well advanced, Emile decided to do something bold. He asked Isabel to meet him at night at the highest point of a hill overlooking the city. It was a place he usually went alone in difficult times, to think, breathe, and try to hear something beyond the chaos. When she arrived, the cold wind was blowing hard, and the city below looked like a sea of lights. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, without taking his eyes off the horizon. "Very," she replied, hugging herself. He looked at her. "I brought this." He took a small envelope out of his pocket. She frowned. "What is it?" "More than before. I'm no longer the man who wrote this, but I'm not someone completely different either. I just learned to love myself a little more, and that changes everything. I don't know if you love me. Sometimes I think you don't. Sometimes I'm sure you don't. But somehow you made me see that I am capable of feeling. And for someone who grew up thinking he was invisible, that is already a miracle. Thank you for that, even if it was never your intention. Are you ready to love someone who doesn't need you but chooses you? Not as a bet, not as a trophy, but as someone who would walk beside you without seeing you above or below. Just beside you. I'm not ready to promise I'll never make mistakes," she said, her voice firm. "I'm made of flaws, but I am ready to say that if you give me a chance, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be someone who walks by your side. Not above, not behind. I don't want to hide behind your forgiveness. I want to build with you." But something inside them finally fell into place. "So," he said in a whisper, "let's start over. My name is Emile. Can I get to truly know you now? Not on each other's humiliation, but on their capacity to grow together." Months later, in a small ceremony without photographers, without ostentation, without designer dresses, Emile and Isabel did something symbolic. They renewed their vows. Not in a castle, not in a hall full of rich people, but at the back of the first Recomeço restaurant, surrounded by employees, simple friends, neighbors, and Emile's mother, sitting in a wheelchair, smiling with eyes full of pride. She wore a simple dress without excess, he a suit that no longer looked too tight, both with hands clasped and eyes full of something that did not exist when it all began: truth. The pastor of that improvised ceremony was the old manager of the original restaurant, too emotional to hide his tears. "The first time you got married for the wrong reason," he said, smiling. "Today, you're here to choose each other, consciously. Not because you need to, not because you bet, but because you decided to be partners. And that, my dears, is the real miracle. Nor your body as a reason for shame. I love you not for what others see, but for the man you chose to be, even after everything I did." And so the phrase that one day was a headline of humiliation. The rich girl married a fat man for a bet, not because of her last name, not because of fame, but because she had the courage to face her own shame and turn it into a new beginning. 5 years had passed since the intimate renewal of vows in the small courtyard of the Recomeso restaurant. 5 years since two worlds, the world of arrogance and the world of humility, collided, broke each other, and then rebuilt themselves side by side. 5 years since Emile and Isabel decided to start over, not as a forced couple, not as a fairy tale, not as victims of fate, but as adults who chose to grow together. And in that time, much had changed. The city remained elegant, clean, organized, but something in the air felt different to those who knew that story. In the neighborhood where there had once been an old, forgotten building, there was now a modern, vibrant and welcoming space. Recomeso Restaurant, Central Unit. Most of the employees were people who had faced hardship in life, former obese people with low self-esteem, women who had escaped abusive relationships, young people rejected by the job market, newly arrived immigrants, elderly people who needed purpose. Everyone there had found family. And Emile, now 37, and with a renewed appearance, was the heart of the place. He had not become thin, and he didn't want to. He was healthy, strong, confident. His body carried the scars of a difficult childhood, but also the steadiness of someone who had finally learned to love himself. He worked in an apron with rolled-up sleeves, walking around the dining room, laughing with customers, teaching employees, checking plates and sometimes wiping down a table just to show that no job was lesser than another. And Isabel? She was the soul of Recomeso. She entered the restaurant early every day, greeting each employee by name, asking how they were, helping at the tables, often washing dishes when the place was too full, something she would never have imagined doing one day. The arrogance that had once defined her had disappeared so completely, it was hard to believe it had ever existed. Today, Isabel was a woman with a steady gaze, a gentle voice, and a genuine smile. Still elegant, of course, but a different kind of elegance, lighter, more human, more real. There were no extravagant jewels, no designer clothes to flaunt, just simplicity and a lot of love. With the success of the main restaurant, Emile and Isabel opened 2 more units. But the most impressive thing wasn't the restaurants themselves, it was their impact on the city. The Recomeso movement, created by Isabel, started as a small campaign to train people in vulnerable situations through gastronomy. 5 years later, the initiative fed hundreds of homeless people every week, offered free technical courses, had partnerships with hospitals to help patients with depression and low self-esteem, created job positions at the restaurant for people rejected due to prejudice, and above all, transformed lives. The woman who once humiliated someone now dedicated her life to lifting up broken people, and that, ironically, made her richer than any inheritance ever could. Emile and Isabel were not a perfect couple. There were days when they argued over simple things like any real couple, others when they cried over personal struggles, days of exhaustion, days of joy. But their love was stable, gentle, deep. It was not the explosive, idealized love from movies. It was better, a love built on respect, patience, and absolute truth. They learned the routine together, shared breakfast, the tired smile after a long shift, the silent hugs before bed, the simple dinners made with 4 hands, and above all, they learned to talk. Isabel always said, "There is no healthy relationship without truth." But it turned into a scar, and scars no longer hurt. They only remind you where you came from and where you decided to go. 2 years after they truly got back together, Isabel found out she was pregnant. The news came on an ordinary morning as she was setting the breakfast table. She felt a slight nausea and thought it was just tiredness. Working in a restaurant was tough, but something inside her said it was different. She took the test in secret. When 2 lines appeared, she sank onto the bathroom floor crying, not out of despair, but because of something she had never felt before, a pure, fearless happiness. Emile almost dropped the pan when she told him, We're going to be parents," he kept repeating, as if trying to grasp the miracle. Isabelle smiled through tears. "You're going to be an amazing father, Emile." But this time he cried because he was too happy. And Isabelle, seeing him hold their daughter in his huge, gentle hands, understood once and for all she had almost lost this man because of arrogance, had almost destroyed the love of her life because of pride. But now, she had him by her side, whole, strong, kind, and that was the greatest miracle God could have done. The great tribute, the mayor continued. Few know that this story was born from pain and humiliation, but these 2 turned scars into a bridge to help hundreds of people, and that is true greatness. I am the result of a broken heart, and she is proof that even the worst in us can be transformed when we decide to change. And for the first time in years, she wrote one last sentence. I am no longer the girl who married a fat man for a bet. I am the woman who loves him for who he is and who was saved by that love. Table 3 asked to meet the chef, but from the decision to be better, and that is the true victory. If you watched until now, I ask you to subscribe to the channel to stay updated on more stories like this. Thank you, and see you in the next video.